All right, let's start jumping into things. So one of the first free content I'm going to put together is really just a simple like action item type of thing. It's going to be a form that's going to collect some brief information. We'll call it a subject and maybe some details. And then we're going to create a comment form that will run in line with that. So basically we'll be able to create an action item or whatever we want to call that. And then we'll be able to associate multiple comments with that action. So we'll have the initial action, the feedback, and then below a comment form that will kind of live update and give you new comments throughout that. Let's jump right in here. I've got two resources open. I've got a resource open that kind of shows you the back end, which we'll fumble through, and I'll show you what I'm doing there. And then I've kind of got a live front end, and we'll bounce around there. So we'll bounce around back and forth between the front end and the back end, creating pages to put the stuff on, all that kind of stuff, whatever we got to do. And you're going to see it all live. So that's the goal here. This is live. It's raw. It's unedited. Uh, there'll be some issues that I'll create. There'll be some issues that I resolve. This is not necessarily representative of a final product that I would develop for someone for a fee. This is the kind of the guts and glory of it, if you will, getting into it and showing you how to do something. Then later I would go through and refine code, add comments and stuff like that, which I am fully supportive of using AI to do. I'll write some of my code, get it working, get it functionable, then I'll take it over into AI and say, hey, go ahead through and comment this out and make and work on the language so that it's easy for someone to understand and clean it up. There's code that I write that isn't necessarily up to the standard, and we want to get it up to the standard so it's efficient and performant for what we're trying to do. So anyway, let's jump back over to our resource. Uh, so I've got a couple of things here. This is really just my contact form on the front end for this App Benevolence website. Really just kind of gives people a way to contact me through a couple of different options that I've made. There's this teleprompter project, which I'll address later. That's kind of a fun one where you can enter some information. It brings up a frameless bordered window in your browser experience and kind of put some text in a black box that you could pull up and throw up on another screen as you go to create content for people when you want to read from a teleprompter like you would in a newsroom. That was a pretty cool one. But anyway, let's jump into this one, which is an action item or a task list or however you want to call it that. So we're going to add a new form here. There's lots of templates in here that I probably don't use enough is quite frankly the best way to say it, but I like to start from scratch and do my own things. So we're going to create a blank form and we're going to start adding some fields. So first one is just going to be call it title for now. Nothing special about that. We're going to add a paragraph field. Call that description. And we're just going to have a simple radio field that kind of indicates incomplete or complete. Depending on which version of Formidable you're using, you'll have access to certain advanced features. I like buttons way more than I like radios. I also like those to, I don't know, look a little better. I like them when they're in line. You may have preferences. The more radios you have to do different things there. Something that's really nice about Formidable Forms is relying upon field keys and field IDs. IDs are automatically generated. They're shown up here. Field keys are something that's automatically generated as well. You can mess around with all these other options. I'm not going to go through too much. I'm going to presume you know a little bit about Formidable Forms. But one of the key takeaways you'll find in my work that I like to work through is, once we know the title of the form, which we haven't defined here yet, kind of like to make a unique type of field key that isn't computer generated, that's more human readable. So let's go ahead and save this and then go over and name our form here. We're going to call it task form. So now we've got a title field. We're going to go ahead and make some of these items required. If we don't have that information, it's going to make things tough. I'm not going to make that required. That's something we'll fill out throughout the life of the project. So let's go back up to our title field. We're going to go into this advanced, and we are going to change the field key. So something unique, the site is called App Benevolence, so that's something we can use. And the reason I say unique, it's in the instance that you guys want to export a form, an application from one website and put it into another. You don't want it overriding something that already has some existing information, so you got to be careful there. It's not going to be unique the way forms deal with it. It's going to be unique based on your knowledge and how you fill out these fields. So in this case, this was App Benevolence website, so I'm going to call it AB, maybe underscore task is the form, and the title is the field. So now we got AB task title. So now we know on the AB website, the task form, the title field. Go ahead and do that same kind of thing over here. We're going to do AB task, and to keep things short, just C for description. Video buttons, we didn't give it a name, but we're going to call that basically status. AB store task for status. So now we can use this reference in creating views, which will be useful, and you'll see how that works out later. I don't necessarily need actions to go with this in some respect. Let me jump over that in a minute. One thing I like to always do, because there's a little snippet I'm going to bring into my form. I bring it into pretty much all of my forms. It's Ajax functionality, which kind of gives the presentation that once you submit a form, something's actually functioning in the background, where you don't always get that depending on the performance of your website. You might just see, in your browser tab or something that reload, and I kind of like a visual feedback to my users to let them know that something's going on. I don't know that I necessarily want to store the entries submitted with this form. Well, no, I do want the stored entries. I mentioned that I like it to be Ajax enabled because that's going to allow me to run this function that creates this visual reference that something's happening. I'm going to go over to my actions and notifications, look at my confirmation. So this is where I want to do this custom code versus Ajax functionality. This is a nice thing that Formidable Forms has for you. It's going to bring up a nice green box as your form was submitted, which is great, but nothing happens after that. Kind of something I'm not super excited about. So I put together a script that I kind of pull across other websites. I'm going to grab that from another window here that you're not going to see, and I'm going to drop that in. So here's what that code looks like. First of all, it's targeting a class. So I don't necessarily know what that class is yet. It's going to be a class that represents a page on my theme that I want to take that whole window and kind of hide the existing HTML and show a temporary HTML that is the visual confirmation that the form was submitted and some visual action that there's something loading in the background. You got to wait till the form refreshes or the page refreshes and shows your new content. So we will fill that out in a little bit. This is from potentially a different theme than the one I'm using. Here is the HTML, which we're going to take. Again, we're going to take the HTML that exists in the existing class, and we're going to replace it with something. Here's what we're replacing it with. We're going to put some language in here that says, your entry was successfully submitted. Thank you, and please wait as you are redirected. So that's kind of your notice that something's about to happen. And I've got this nice little thing called for an image reference that says, show this image until after a period of time, then refresh the page. So here's our content. We're replacing the HTML. We're putting our language in. We're putting in an animated GIF, a GIF image that will do something visually for the people to see, let it know that something's happening. It'll do that for roughly 1 second before the page refreshes to wherever it currently is. We can We could change that and make it go somewhere else. But for a lot of the things that I do, it's just leaving it on the same thing. So one thing I've got to do is uh, go over into my media library where I've uploaded an animated GIF and pull that media um, that I want to use. It's these grinding gears over here. So I want to pull that URL, file URL, and I'm going to drop it over into here under that source. It's looking for the file source. For something I've done dynamically that shows up in one of my code snippets that I'll publish with this is something that dynamically pulls the site URL instead of specifically referencing it. So the shortcut I've got for that is just site URL, dynamically going to grab that, but it does need to know potentially where that specific content is uploaded to, and we got that from the media URL. It tells us what that is. I've got some custom styling to make it look a certain way, and we want that to function when the entry is created. So, a lot of times the default name of these is something that is useful, but maybe you want to add some additional information at a glance that you can see it. I'm going to say confirmation submitted, and I only want it to trigger when the entry is created, or do I want it to entry, let's say when it's updated as well, because we're going to make it so that it's editable. I do not want emails at this point, so I'm just going to turn that off. No customization of the emails. Let's get a preview of what that's looking like. I don't have anything else I'm customizing at this point. Let's see what it looks like in the theme. Okay, that's not a great view in the theme because there's actually a white border in my pages. So let's just do a blank page so that you get kind of the idea. So the title, here's the description, and here's our buttons, and here's our submit. All right, things are looking good as far as the preview goes. Let's go ahead and put it on a page somewhere. So we're going to create a new page. I don't have an existing page for it. We're going to call this new page task management, because we're going to have the task entry form, and then we're going to create a view, and then we're going to create a comment system so that you can add multiple comments to each task. It's individual comments for each task. So if you go on one task, you see its corresponding comments. You go into another, you see its corresponding comments. Let's create that form. I think it's going to throw us over to the page. Decide if we're happy with it and publish it. It's going to take the defaults. Go ahead and publish it. So that's done. I can put it up and see what it looks like on the front end. Okay, I've got a page function that does some social media sharing. I'm going to hide that temporarily. I don't care to see that on the front end. Turn social media snap off there. Let's refresh, see what it looks like over here. All good. Okay, so we've got this now to create a form, and it's got the Ajax thing going on in the background, which right now would just refresh this once I submitted it. So let's just go ahead and just, so you can see that, let's just put in a test one. We'll delete this later. Custom free. Let's go into I and a space in here. So, here, you get the live stuff. You don't always get what you're expecting, right? Clear that way. Did not expect. Task description test. Wait. It was the correct class. You saw it there. It showed the guide. It showed the loading animation. It showed my message that my entry is successfully submitted. It refreshed the page. Now, I like to do things a little different. I kind of like to have it pop up in a modal. I like my forms to show up generally in a modal uh, on a page where there's a view where there's content to review. So in that sense, I would like to have a view on this page instead of the form itself. We'll go through and modify that, but essentially we're going to have a view that lists the title, description, and that is in very simple form. So let's go back to the back end. Let's go to back to formidable forms. In this case, we've got the task form we just created. We got views. We don't have any views currently. We're going to go ahead and create a new view for this form. There's many ways to do this. I kind of like to do things in my own way, using my own short codes and custom codes that I use from plugins that allow me to extend my apps a little more quickly than I might be able to do with coding everything by hand. So task form view, sure, that could create an application if we wanted to, and put all this together in. We might do that at the end and wrap it up and put it on a page for you all to see along with the video. So for visual view, you have before content, after content, and the repeating content, essentially the dynamic content. We're going to go into here first because this allows us to pull in some of the short codes that I might use that help me do things a little more quickly as suggested. So in here we've got columns. I can create some dynamic columns pretty quickly. So I've got this is short codes ultimate. This is something I like to use. I'm a pretty big fan of. So we got 3 items. So we're going to make 3 columns. You can read through the documentation and know that this would work or not. You can create custom classes, divide whether it's centered or not. You can do a lot of things through custom CSS, and I recommend that, but for the purposes of what we're doing, this is going to be hand coded and a little more haphazard, if you will. Title, column for title, we're going to have a column for description, status. Now, I've written this in the dynamic content just so I can take advantage of that, so I'm going to pull all of that out of there, flip back over to here and drop it in my header because this is my header content. This is not repeatable, but it's kind of like the table head, if you will, or the column head for each of these. Drop that in. Now we've got that. It doesn't necessarily render correctly in the back end, but it will render correctly on the front end. You know that. So now we're going to go through and pull all these out and drop in our dynamic shortcodes to render the information that we actually want to see in the dynamic part of the content. Okay, there, we're going to do temporary view, see what that would look like. It's calling me a liar and acting like what it's doing, what it's supposed to do. And I mentioned a form modal, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the Formidable Forms Codex and find my modal code because I like to enter that manually. Again, I just like to do all the things manually. That's just how I deal with it. I'm able to do a little more sometimes with the manual shortcode than you can do with the automatically generated stuff. Free to do it however you like to do it. So go up here in the top, little button, content in there, which is actually going to be a formidable form. Form that we want is the task form. I don't know that I necessarily need to see anything particular. Here, form, bigger rather than smaller. So that parameter is really it that we're pulling from there. Fast, we'll call it. We haven't dropped the view into a page yet. Add it into the existing page. We want to drop that over in task management. Two things here. We got the view and the form. We're going to go ahead and drop the form because we're now embedding that into a modal. Here, funky, but generally it's all there. So now that we've got this new modal in here, we've got to change the action for what we want to take over in here. So really what we want to get is the modal body. We want to hide all of that in the HTML and replace it with our custom HTML. So we can do that if we open up the form. Go back to setting, go back over to our actions, find class that we want to replace. That. So now theoretically, once I correct all this and make it look a little better, when I add a task, it's going to dynamically refresh this page and show us every new task that's there. So let's go back and try to fix the view. Sorry, you can't see the URL of where everything's at. I don't think it's necessary. You see my bookmarks and the specific URLs. If you've been in this, you know what it's doing for us here. One of the things we can look at is when we publish a view, you can add parameters. This is where we might add that. You can add parameters to the shortcode when we publish a view. So publish view, I want to look for here, put it to the insert shortcode manually. So now we need to know which view ID we're dealing with. This one happens to be 12080. I can see that up in the URL. You can't see that per se. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of this insert actually and drop in our own shortcode. It's going to be this. Now to get rid of potential auto paragraphs, which might be corrupting the columns that I inserted, we can insert W auto P0 to turn off auto paragraphing. Go back over here. These things, look at that. All right, so back over here, I kind of see now that, maybe this needs some spacing between the rows and where the add task button Yeah, there it is. Now we got a little space. We got a little, kind of like to have some separation between all my information, the header and then each individual entry. So I'm going to go back over into here and I'm going to put this within a div. And again, classes and IDs probably a better way to do it, but I'm just going to go ahead and add some inline style. Once we know where we want these, we could create a class that symbolizes the style that I'm about to write in line. I'm going to say border bottom 1px solid and black, essentially what that code is. So let's see if that does what I think it's supposed to do. Well, it did under the add task and under the title, so I got to put it in the right spot, but it did do what I wanted to do. So move that div where I actually want it is around the heading here. Do that for each individual. Well, here. Pretty good, right? Sort of. I mean, it's not as pretty. I don't got to figure out why I can't put spaces into my single line text fields. I'll get that worked out in a future iteration, but for now we're just going to deal with what we got to work with. So now we got our first task. Let's go ahead and add a second fake task. Test 2, 2, and then complete. Let's see if it does our nice little action. It does. Redirect us. It's going to reload the page and show our new entry. So that's really one thing I like it to do. Now the next thing I like to do is link basically a whole row within our layout to link to an edit entry. Now there's a specific way Formidable Form wants you to do that, and then there's a way that I do it. So let's first look at the way Formidable Forms likes it. We're going to go ahead and throw in detail link short code into there, and that's going to generate basically the detail entry for each one. Here it's going to create some kind of crazy looking, but essentially this is the entry for each of those entries that we just submitted. So I like to cheat that a little bit. So go back over here and make what we can dynamic and wrap our entire row in a href link to that. Let me show you what I mean by that. Get rid of that guy there. Now around our row, we're going to take that entry. Now we got to make the parts dynamic that we know are dynamic. And with those, so this is represents the entry ID. Drop entry ID in there. So now we're taking that dynamic URL page where it exists, and we're going to go to the detailed entry part of that, which is kind of identified here. And in the view, it references that it's going to go to an entry with a specific ID. So if we've done that right, I've not done that right so far. I've got to go around the entire div. That in. These things kind of start to take some color to them, letting you know that its entire thing's a link. Now this whole thing is a link. So when I hover over these, they are linked by the entire row. You can kind of see that down in the bottom of the browser. You're not going to see it in the view that I have, but essentially as I hover, it tells you which entry it's going to take me to. I click on it. I don't do anything at this point, but essentially it's going to take me into the detail view once I've defined it. Go back over here to this view, go to our detail page, and let's just add those in. I don't want to use the entries. I want to use those cool unique keys that we talked about right now with no formatting really at this point. We're going to make the form itself needs to have permissions to edit it because we're going to make it editable. So I always like to say the logged in user can edit their own entries and administrators can edit other people's entries. So that's the reason that wouldn't show up before, because we didn't have edit entries on. So we didn't have permission set in the form to edit entries. So we couldn't go see what those even were. So now we got a problem. We got a link to entry, but kind of really like how do we get back to the place where we want to enter the entry? Okay, well, that's not a big deal to address that. So this is what we want to go back to, this main title page. I'm copying the URL out of the browser, which is where this page is posted. We're going to go back to our view. We're going to go to the detailed entry page, and we're simply going to drop a new href back to list, call page that's the main list. Replace this with that nice dynamic code grabbing the URL of the site. Again, this is if I happen to export this, put it on another site, and as long as I had the code snippet that renders this shortcode, it's always going to link up, presuming the pages and everything is linked correctly with the same naming convention, so on and so forth. Now we've got this. Now we've got our page. We can add a task through a modal. We can click a link. We've got our back to list, takes us back. Let's pretty that up a little bit. Let's create some separation between those, like we did the last. Page, here, information, back to list. Now we want to pretty that up maybe a little bit. Let's clean that up a little bit. Let's make it look something like what a detail page might look like. We got title here, space in there so that it creates a space between the label and the actual output of the dynamic content. Description here. So that down a couple. Separate that a little bit from the content that we want to focus on. Add this, that, refresh the page, go into detail, see what that looks like. Okay, it's great. Title. Oh, we didn't add a line breaks in there appropriately. Put some line breaks in there where we need them. This might create too much. Okay, just an example. There's our description, there's our status. Let's go back to our list. Looking good so far. So we also wanted to be able to edit these. Go ahead and drop in a edit link somewhere and decide how we're going to do that. Again, this is something I like to kind of work with. So you can drop in this edit entry link and link it back to a page. You'd have to link it back to the page where the form is. But again, I like all my stuff to show up in modals. So it's kind of all in one spot. The user experience is relatively intuitive. let's see if we can do something like that. So let's go grab that modal shortcode from the other page, from the parent page. Go back to the detail page, drop that formatable field. Let's go back to the resource page for publishing a form, because it's got some shortcode in it that gives you the ability to define which entry you're editing. There's a parameter that we want to define over here in this view. So then the formidable shortcode that represents the form, we want the ID to be the dynamic ID of this entry. It really doesn't like how you have double brackets at the end, so we'll have to clean that up a little bit. So let's edit task now because that's changed. Maybe we'll call this edit task, and then and just let people see the actual ID of the task you're editing. A little space between there and there. Let's see what that looks like. Now we got back to list and edit task here, right here. Back to list, edit task, edit. Like it so far, so right there. The form is actually 23, which is fine. Entry ID. Probably actually use the get parameter task and pull the entry ID maybe. It would be dynamic. So it understands that. Extra bracket in it. Gotta finagle with thing to see if it likes what it likes. All right, there we go, actually. So now we can update this completely. And if we've done that right in our build setting for the form, for the action items, we currently had it set to create. Okay, we got it create and updated. So now that visual action is going to happen. So we could change the way that this language happens if you wanted to do that. We could create a duplicate of the submitted, take away the updated here, call this confirmation updated. Make that only happen when the entry is updated. It's the same thing going to happen both ways, except the language is going to be a little different. Your entry was successfully updated. And when it's updated, you're going to get a slightly different message than when it was submitted. To our main view. I realize I'm flipping around fast. You may have to pause this video, rewind, slip it back and forth, find out where you need to be, but go. Now we got the main list. We've got the header, and we've got each individual entry, and then we've got each individual entry linked to a detailed page. We can add a task from where the entries exist through a modal. The modal has action code around it that will run a jQuery on an AJAX function. So when you hit submit, it creates an AJAX function, then it kicks in the jQuery that displays the user message that says we're going to reload the page, your entry was successfully submitted. It creates the entries ad hoc and refreshes the page. We go into our individual views and modify the entries individually. That was 6. Let's go see if it's got the correct description too here. It does. So it's grabbing the correct entries, putting it into the edit function, part of the submittable form. Things are looking good. Now we have to create basically a form that is linked to an individual entry. The reason we're doing that is we talked about comments. So we want to create a comment form that captures some information. We're going to use probably the user login ID and then basically the comment. And then from that, Formidable Forms provides some shortcodes that can capture, created at, entry date, updated entry date, those things. We can choose the format of how that outputs. Uh, we could do a similar function to what we did here in terms of allowing you to add a comment, then update a comment, edit a comment, and update it. So we'll take a look at that. Maybe that'll be part two. We've kind of jumped through a lot here, get to the point of having a listing of things, being able to add a task live, being able to go into a detailed entry by clicking on the entire row, look at the details. We can get back to the list from the detailed view. We made that happen. And then we also have the ability to edit the task. So part two of this task management video will be adding a comment section. I hope you enjoyed what you see. I hope you've learned something from this. I will talk to you again soon. Thanks.